These propagations are just the spark that lit the latest wave of violence, but the real driving force of this violence is an ongoing occupation of the Palestinian territories, land theft, driving Palestinians out of their homes, and this sort of stuff that goes on is basically a recipe that's inevitably going to lead to violence. And I think people who are serious about resolving this conflict peacefully should be looking at that primary cause.
But what Omar calls the occupation is not the cause of the conflict and of the violence. And the proof is that between 1949 and between 1967, when the West Bank was controlled by Jordan and when the Gaza Strip was controlled by Egypt, nobody at the time established a Palestinian state. Nobody said at the time that they were occupied. And there was violence already at the time against Israelis, many terrorist attacks, and there was no peace at the time. And so the control of the West Bank and in the past of the Gaza Strip by Israel is the consequence and not the cause of the violence. The real cause of the violence, of course, is the same incitement by the Palestinian leadership, falsely accusing Israel of wanting to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is, of course, a lie, but this lie is not new.
Frankly,
it started already
really telling
in the 1920s.
That you want to drag us all the way
At the time,
back
there was no occupation, there was no state of Israel. When the leader of the Palestinians, Haj Amin Khalhusseini, in 1929, falsely accused the Jews of trying to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Dr. Navon.
It was in 1929.
It's very convenient that Dr. Navon wants to go back to before the 1960s, before there was an occupation, to mention the fact that there was still a conflict. Indeed, yes, half a century ago, things were very, very different than they are today. But it's very clear at this point that at least since the late 80s, there has been a basic framework for resolving the conflict known as the two-state solution, by which Israel withdraws from the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, and what you get in return is Palestinian recognition of Israel, and that's the two-state solution. Except, of course, throughout the entire peace process, instead of withdrawing from the occupied territories, all Israel did was build more and more illegal settlements on those Palestinian territories, and thereby defeating the entire idea of a peace process. Now, Netanyahu, of course, who wants neither a binational state where Palestinians have equal rights within Israel, nor does he want to end the occupation, will conveniently try to deflect attention away from the issue that is really at hand. But frankly, anybody who's paying attention to what is happening and whose IQ is above average room temperature can see immediately through that propaganda. We're actually talking about an occupation that is condemned by the UN, condemned by every human rights organization, the International Court of Justice, and even the US government, which has been supporting Israel forever with diplomatic support and military aid, also opposes that occupation. So let's not pretend that has nothing to do with things.
The truth is, and the opposite of what has just been said, is that since the signature of the Oslo agreements in 1993, the Palestinians have been systematically breaching those agreements by using weapons and importing illegal weapons, by inciting against Israel, and when twice, in July 2000 at the Camp David conference, and then again in 2008 under the leadership of former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, the Israeli leadership offered an almost complete withdrawal from both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as was just described. The Palestinian leadership rejected the peace offer. It was the case of Yasser Arafat in July 2000 and of Mahmoud Abbas in 2008.
This mythical account of what Camp David was, has to be busted immediately. Here's the fact. Camp David II, the person who was Israel's foreign minister at the time, Shlomo Ben Ami, he said that had he been Palestinian, he would not have accepted the Camp David II Accords because he did not think it offered the Palestinians a sovereign state. So that settles that question entirely. And frankly, at the end of the day, you can just look whoever's account you want to take. The fact that settlement building continued throughout the entire peace process and the number of settlers doubled in the West Bank from the beginning of the peace process until it ultimately fell apart is a clear sign that Israel was never serious about ending the occupation.
Well, everything that has been just said is completely wrong, of course. According to international law, it's Resolution 242 of the Security Council from 1967 that says that Resolution 242, that was negotiated for 6 months at the Security Councils, calls for an Israeli withdrawal from territories, not from all the territories, because Israel did not occupy a foreign country, but the West Bank was illegally controlled by Jordan in the past, and Resolution 242 does not call for a return to the pre-67 ceasefire line. So that's first of all. Second of all, regarding the settlements, Regarding the settlement, I did not interrupt you. I did not interrupt you, and you lied. Don't interrupt me with what I say. So when Israel withdrew from the West Bank, all its settlements, did we have peace? Oh no, no, we didn't. Now, with regard to the West Bank, again, those settlements represent 2% of the territory, and Israel already offered to remove them, as it did, by the way, in the Gaza Strip, which did not bring peace, but on the contrary, it brought dozens of thousands of missiles fired by Hamas towards Israeli cities and civilians.
I mean, just he mentioned Gaza, the fact that Israel withdrew from Gaza and there were rockets. Let's also not kid ourselves about the fact that Israel never left Gaza. They withdrew settlers, but they kept a complete and total stranglehold on Gaza, where for a while there, for years, they were not allowing in potato chips or cookies or sodas. I guess what? A fear that Hamas might launch chocolate chip rockets at Israel? I mean, and even after that, after intense pressure from the international community, from humanitarian activists, including lives lost by Turkish activists who were on these flotilla ships trying to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, that Israel eased the siege on Gaza and allowed some humanitarian items in, but it continues to dictate who gets in and who gets out, continues complete and total control of the airspace of Gaza, shoots at Palestinian fishermen who are fishing off of the coast of Gaza. Okay. It is absolutely true. It is absolutely true. And just when you look at that context, you can't pretend that the occupation of Gaza actually ended. And you can't pretend that the Palestinians are free there.
Can I just ask both sides to return to the current crisis?
You can't have any kind of gesture of goodwill be carried out effectively while Palestinians in East Jerusalem continue to be pushed out of their homes. I mean, virtually every few weeks there's a new footage of Palestinians being thrown out of their homes in East Jerusalem and then settlers who come and take over that home. This is not, I mean, there's a systematic ethnic cleansing, so I don't think that ultimately is going to be about any gestures of goodwill. There has to be a real shift in the Israeli government towards actually accepting Palestinian rights.
Let me raise that question with Dr. Navon.
Well, what has been said about Palestinians being expelled from their homes is complete nonsense. Nobody is being expelled from their homes. The only one who've been expelled from their homes were the Jewish inhabitants of the Gaza Strip. And yes, Israel withdrew completely from the Gaza Strip. But when you hear today, for example, that after Israel withdrew, we're still accused of occupying the Gaza Strip. So you might wonder why Israel would have some doubts about what would happen after it completely withdrew from the West Bank. But to answer your question, as I said, those settlements are the result and not the cause of the conflict. And they represent 2% of the territory. And as a matter of fact, in the past 6 years, under the prime ministership of Netanyahu, there has been less settlement construction than under his predecessors. But let me ask you a question. If we're really talking about a two-state solution, why can't there be a Jewish minority in a Palestinian state the same way that there's an Arab minority in the Jewish state? 20% of Israel's citizens are Jewish. But when Mahmoud Abbas says that in the future Palestinian state there won't be room for a single Jew, can you explain this to me? Why should there be a minority only in one state?
No. The difference here is absolutely clear and straightforward. The Palestinian population that is within Israel is indigenous. It lived there. It was there before the establishment of Israel. Israel established itself on top of them. But when we're looking at Jewish settlers who are now building within the Palestinian territories, these are people who are stealing Palestinian land in order to live on it. So that's the distinction. When they say there's no tolerance of settlers taking over Palestinian land, this is not some kind of anti-Semitic plan. I mean, this is total nonsense. So many of my friends who are Jewish peace activists travel to Palestine. They say they've never felt welcomed anywhere in the world as they do when they're in Palestinian homes, because they're viewed as people who are there to actually contribute to solving the problem, not the people who are there to steal other people's land and build on it. There are only two ways to resolve this conflict. You could either give Palestinians independence in the occupied territories and a sovereign state that they can be their own, or the alternative is a single state, one man, one vote for all Israelis and all Palestinians to live together in one state. The problem is, I don't think Israel is interested in either one of them and is building very, very significant impediments to either one of them being realized. So, as you mentioned, there's more than 500,000 settlers now in the West Bank. It's so divided. It's very difficult to imagine that Israel is going to withdraw all these settlers and really allow for Palestinian sovereignty. On the other hand, also the idea that Israel would abolish Zionism and allow Palestinians, refugees, to come back to their homes and allow for a complete mix of people seems equally implausible. So we're really dealing with an Israeli government, and frankly, given the fact that they're democratically elected by a population that is shifting farther and farther to the right, is really concerning. This is a population that is not really interested in resolving the conflict. I think they feel really drunk with power, able to impose whatever they want on the Palestinians without any consequence. And until that changes, until there's a shift in the equilibrium, I think we're going to be stuck.
Because the Palestinians don't want to establish a state, they want to destroy Israel. And when we see today what happens in the Middle East, where 22 failed Arab states and one falling after the other, imploding after the other. Look at Iraq, look at Syria, look at Lebanon, look at Libya. The idea of creating another failed Arab state 15 kilometers from Tel Aviv, when the Palestinians keep inciting and are switching more and more towards Islamic fundamentalism. I remind you that Hamas controls the West Bank. I remind you that the reason why Mahmoud Abbas hasn't had election, controls the Gaza Strip, I remind you that the reason why Mahmoud Abbas has postponed elections for 10 years for his leadership is because he knows that Hamas would win. So we have a fundamentalist society that sees itself as Islamic, does not even recognize the very concept of nation state. And they're talking about creating another failed Arab state in the Middle East. It's a bit counterintuitive.
Let's be clear also about the fact that when he's invoking what's happening in the region and the shift to Islamization and this and that, what he's really doing is he's engaging in a really effective propaganda technique to shift people's sympathies. When you see what ISIS is doing, to somehow try to connect that to what Israel is fighting in the Palestinian territories, of course, is transparently silly. The Palestinian struggle for justice, the Palestinian struggle for freedom in their own country has nothing to do with the drive towards Islamization in neighboring countries. And certainly Israel's struggle to steal Palestinian lands and to build settlements on it has nothing to do with fighting Islamization. So just let's put that one aside.
Let's say we accept your argument. So what is the Israeli solution? What is the strategic solution that Israel seeks for this conflict? If they reject the concept of creating another failed Arab state in your terms, or basically you're saying that a Palestinian state would have the same fate as Iraq, Syria, or Libya. So what is your solution?
Right, but first of all, your question assumes that there is a solution. And the truth is that in life, not every problem has a solution. Eventually, we might be able to reach a two-state solution, as we have tried since 1937. But the fact is that until now, and when Mahmoud Abbas says that he will never recognize Israel as a nation-state of the Jewish people, I do not see how we can implement it. Now, Israel always had the option, as it did in the Gaza Strip, to unilateral withdraw from most of the West Bank, as it did in the Gaza Strip. That would preserve its Jewish majority, and it would let the other side continue in its complete rejection of Israel. Of course, even if Israel would withdraw from the West Bank, it would still be accused of occupying it, the same way that it's still accused of occupying the Gaza Strip. But at least it would put the demographic issue on the side. That would not completely solve the problem, but at least Israel has this card under its knee.
In terms of what Israel's solution is right now, Israel has chosen the apartheid solution. It does not want to grant Palestinians independence. It does not want to treat them as equal citizens. It effectively wants to squeeze them behind certain walls, give them really tiny areas where they can exercise no sovereignty, where they can be completely under the boot of Israeli control. And that's effectively the apartheid solution. And what that calls on from the international community, not very different from what happened in South Africa during the apartheid era, is international pressure on Israel to actually compel it to end the apartheid system and to accept equality for Palestinians and treat them as human beings. This includes sanctions. This includes putting economic pressure, political pressure. And I think we're moving in that direction, actually. Globally, there is less and less tolerance for Israeli policies. When you say intifada, it's a generic term for rebellion. Rebellion, the form that a rebellion takes, really matters. The first intifada was largely nonviolent. You saw a policy of Palestinians who are throwing rocks, being beaten by Israeli soldiers, having their bones broken. As a matter of policy, soldiers were testifying that these were the orders that they were given. The second intifada, Palestinians decided to do an armed version of this, which I think gave Israel an excuse to crack down in the worst way possible. I think what is really needed is a Palestinian nonviolent struggle. The one that I was just talking about, in the West Bank, in opposition to the wall, in opposition to the occupation, boycotting of settlement products, and what is needed also internationally in solidarity with that nonviolent uprising is also nonviolent pressure to compel Israel to back down. I think that form of uprising would probably be the most effective way to combat Israeli occupation and apartheid.
The current violence has nothing to do with a peaceful demonstration against Israel. It is the stabbing and the intentional killing of Jews with a Palestinian leadership that encourages it, with parents that glorify the killing of Jews as a religious commandment, again, as a reaction of the so-called destruction of Al-Aqsa, which is a complete lie. At the end of the day, yes, we do have to negotiate to find a two-state solution. But as long as the Palestinian leadership runs away from its historical responsibilities, continues to incite its population, promising to come back to Jaffa, to Haifa, and to Beersheba, and to say that Israel will be, at the end of the day, destroyed, and it's just a staged strategy, I do not see how we can reach a two-state solution. As I said, Israel, of course, always has the option of doing that unilaterally, as it did in the Gaza Strip, and let the other side build its own failed state.
Omar, would you like to respond to that?
When we're talking about incitement, I mean, again, this is just a cheap shot, because there are people who, like Rabbi Yitzhak Shapiro, one of the leaders in the settlements, who also says, based on biblical understanding, that killing Palestinian civilians, including children, is okay. And everybody can do that. You can grab random religious leaders, lunatics who have said really crazy stuff. But that's not the point. You're really avoiding the central issue. It is absolutely true. You can check those quotes for yourself. The central issue here is that when we're looking at the occupation, I mean, it's quite remarkable that you have one side that is building more and more settlements on land that they're pretending that they want to give up, and then nobody's asking any questions. But we're supposed to pretend that Israel is serious about a peace process that it itself undermined by building more and more settlements and entrenching the occupation deeper and deeper. That's just utter silliness.